Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the May 12th Planning Commission meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 1:04. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please? Or a roll call, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start the roll call. Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Vice Chair Bonderson.
Here.
Commissioner Bauke.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We will move on to preliminary matters, and we'll start with 2A. Ms. DeBusk, are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items?
Chair Escobedo, we have none.
Thank you. How about any announcements or appeals?
No announcements or appeals.
Thank you. So that takes us to 2C, which is review, consideration, and action on the Planning Commission meeting minutes and resolutions for April 21st, 2022. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 5 of 6 of the minutes, under my comments, the fourth bullet, it says residences. And what I actually said, and I think it was hard to determine from the tape, was residence. And so I've spoken with the PC secretary, and that's been changed to residence.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge.
Move to approve as amended.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have some more edits. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, on page 4 of 6, under my comments, just a clarification that I'd like changed, and that's the sea level rise adaptation plan should be looked at and referenced where applicable because there are flood zone areas that exist and instead of will continue to exist, may be impacted by sea level rise. And then I have another change on the fourth bullet point on the same page. Would like to include the shade study. It was really a shade study done of street trees on various streets, so let's just call it the street tree shade study and the street tree master plan. So those are my changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Ms. Fennessy, did you get those edits?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Move to approve as amended. Amended?
I'll second.
So we have a first and a second. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. Commissioner Bauke.
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson.
Yes.
And Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. So now we will move on to public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. And we do not have any speaker slips. I'm not seeing any, so we'll close out public comment. And we'll move on to our first item today, which is 701 North Milpas. This is a revised proposal for a mixed-use project containing 82 residential units and approximately 1,365 square feet of non-residential floor area. And this is here for discretionary applications for a height exemption, a front setback modification, and a parking modification. And who do we have from staff to give today's presentation?
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. We have Kathleen Kennedy giving the staff presentation.
Thank you, Ms. DeBus. Welcome, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'll need to have my PowerPoint shifted. There we go. I've got it all figured out. It's a new process. Okay, I'm Kathy Kennedy, case planner for this project at 701 North Milpas Street. The purpose of the hearing today is to consider revisions to an approved project consisting of 82 residential units and 1,365 square feet of non-residential floor area, consistent with the City Council-approved development agreement. The discretionary applications before you today are the height exception to allow a community benefit housing project to be between 45 and 60 feet in height, a front setback modification to allow uncovered parking spaces to encroach into the front setback along Ortega Street, and a parking modification to allow less than the required number of residential parking spaces. Here is a slide showing the project site. It is 701 North Milpas. It used to be addressed as 711 North Milpas, as you may recall. There were a number of lots, between 8 and 9 lots that were merged. So then it was given a new address of 701 North Milpas. It's located in between East Ortega Street and East De La Guerra Street. Here's an aerial photo showing the existing lot, numerous buildings on the site, which would all be removed as part of this project. So there's been a lot of background related to this project and these revisions, so I'm going to go through a little bit of those. It'll take a little bit of time to bring everyone up to date on everything. So back in 2015, excuse me, the Planning Commission held a concept review of the AUD project, and then it went to the staff hearing officer who approved the front setback and parking modifications. Then it went to the Architectural Board of Review, which granted it project design approval. Then there was a substantial conformance determination made, which involved reducing the non-residential square footage to 2,737 square feet, increased the number of units to 76, and because the non-residential area was decreased, the parking modification was no longer needed at that point. Then the project went back to ABR, looking for final approval. They were not able to do that. The applicant filed an appeal because it was denied. City Council upheld the appeal of the applicant and granted final approval of the plans that were reviewed last at the ABR. So the approved project consists of 4 stories, 76 rental units, 2,737 square feet of non-residential commercial floor area, 76 parking spaces for the residents, and 12 commercial parking spaces. So then more recently, in June of 2020, council members Friedman and A. Gutierrez brought a proposal to the City Council. Owners had approached them with some suggested revisions to the project, which included changing the architecture, adding 6 units, providing 16 moderate affordable units, and increasing the height somewhat. And the council members asked council to direct staff to work with the owners to prepare a development agreement, which is what they did. Part of that was the City Council approved a term sheet first, and that term sheet included the goals of the project description, the review procedures or steps that this project would go through, and all the time frames and deadlines associated that are required by both the city and the owner, and then directed staff to negotiate this development agreement. So the term sheet lays out all the steps. So because this project's a little different than most that you see, I'm going to go through these. A number of them have been completed already. First was, of course, the term sheet itself approved. Excuse me. And then the owner submitted the development agreement. The development agreement was reviewed by staff. The project was brought to ABR for concept review. Only one review was required, but they decided to go back for a second review because they had made some changes in response to the ABR comments. The Planning Commission reviewed the proposed development agreement. So some of you were on the commission at the time will recall this back last summer, and made a recommendation to the City Council to approve the development agreement. City Council did approve it last September, and then the owner submitted all required applications for the discretionary approvals that are before you today. So today you'll consider the height exception and the 2 modifications. And I wanted to note that in the development agreement, it states that the Planning Commission's deliberations and decisions shall be consistent with the development agreement. The pending items would be that project goes back to ABR for project design approval and final approval. and then they would submit applications for the building and grading permits. For the development agreement itself, the key provisions are about the project, the revisions include adding 6 rental units, so it would go from 76 to 82 units total. 16 of the units would be moderate income affordable, and the architecture would change to the more traditional style. Also in the development agreement is that the affordable units would have the same percentage of bedrooms as the overall project. So for the overall project, there are 63% 2-bedroom and 37% 1-bedroom. So that would be the same percentage for the affordable units as well. The development agreement includes the project description. It outlines the uses, the density, the maximum height, the public improvements, et cetera, and they're all attached to the development agreement. There are a number of procedures and timelines related to this. The owner agrees to submit all discretionary applications within 90 days of the development agreement being approved, which they have done. And now we're at the point where they're looking for approval. If the city has not taken final action on the discretionary applications within 6 months of being deemed complete, the owner may go directly to the city council for final action. Also, the owner will agree to submit applications for the building and grading permits within 90 days of the effective date of discretionary approvals. And then the owner agrees to submit all fees and then to request issuance of the permits when they are ready to be issued. So I'd like to show you a little bit about the approved project. So here's a site plan from a while ago when the non-residential square footage was about 2,700, when there were 76 residential units and 12 commercial spaces. I can zoom in a little bit on this. Here, and this area is the retail space, and this area here is more manager residential amenity space. And you'll see how it's changed for the current project. I'd like to point out this whole area here, the Ortega Street right-of-way over to the right will be reconfigured. This is all new proposed parking spaces that are perpendicular as opposed to just ad hoc kind of random parking along this area. And then the parking on this left side is on the private property. There are 12 parking spaces within the setback, and we'll talk about that more later. But this is consistent what is being proposed today as well. Wanted to show you also just the 4th floor of the approved project. You'll notice down here, away from Milpas, so Milpas is at the top. The units are set back, and there aren't that many on the 4th floor. You'll see on the new proposal that there are many more units on that top floor. So in regard to the proposed project, here we have below the approved project, and then you'll see the change to the more Spanish traditional style architecture on top. Also, some more comparisons between what is approved already and what is being revised. Essentially, the building height is being raised a little bit, 42 feet maximum, but most of it is 48 feet. The commercial parking requirement was 12, and now it is 6, although there will be opportunities to park for 12 for commercial, and we'll talk about that later. Residential has increased from 76 to 98. In terms of density, it has changed from 50 units per acre to 54 units per acre, but the maximum at that site would be 63. Average unit size, the requirement is 901. It was prior 683, and now is 765 square foot. So here are the Ortega Street and Milpas Street elevations. The top is the Ortega Street elevation. See the commercial retail area in the corner. And then below is the Milpas Street elevation. Here on the top is the south elevation. So this would be If you're at the junior high looking at the project, there's tucked under parking shown here. And then below is the west elevation. So if you're looking at the building from Milpas, it's to the right. Here is the site plan. Again, I want to point out that the parking is similar to, or the same as what was in the previous project. We have a number of parking lifts. Actually, I'll zoom in here a little bit for you to see better. All these areas here, tucked under parking, are parking lifts. So 2 parking spaces instead of 1. There's an open space area in the middle. Here's the first floor. So the change from the previous plan, there's a smaller retail space here, much more residential amenity space, a co-working area, workrooms, conference rooms, a larger fitness area, workout rooms. Second floor consists of a number of the residential units, and the third floor is similar to the second floor. And then the fourth floor has many more units than the previous project. It also has a very large roof deck up here close to Milpas Street. I'd like to go through the design review history a little bit. The project did go back to ABR on 2 occasions. They appreciated the change to the Spanish-style architecture. We're generally accepting of the height increase, although some members said that some of the areas were too tall. They did say, though, that it does not meet the project compatibility analysis criteria, and they weren't in support of the setback modification, stating that it was resulting in an overbuilt project, just noting that this was part of the previous approval as well. And they said that it's not consistent with the design guidelines, and size, bulk, and scale not completely appropriate, and that some of the massing has not been successfully resolved yet. I want to point out, though, that, again, the ABR's comments and considerations need to also be consistent with the development agreement. So in regard to the discretionary applications before you today, the first one's the height exception. Community benefit housing projects may request an exception to the 45-foot height limitation and propose buildings up to 60 feet. The majority of this project would be 48 feet tall, with some elements at 52. As you are aware, there are 4 findings needed for the height exception: a demonstrated need, architecture and design, livability, and sensitivity to context. I've included these in the staff report, but essentially the project would be about 48 feet tall, maximum, a few portions taller. These are needed to accommodate the type of architectural style that they are proposing. And in terms of livability, they provide amenities to the residents which ensure the livability of the project, appropriate amount of light and air for all units, appropriate ceiling height, plate heights, access to fitness rooms and shared workspaces. So in regard to the front setback modification, so this modification, like I said, is the same as the previous project. It's parking within the setback on Ortega Street. And I'm going to show you the site plan here. I'll zoom in a little bit. So we're talking about these 12. Actually, there's another space over here that's encroaching as well. But we're mostly concerned about this, I think, this area here. So there are 12 spaces that encroach. And the way this whole area is designed, it's more like a parking lot. They call double-loaded parking. So it's a dead-end road so that you drive in and it feels more like a parking lot. So we felt like this was an appropriate use in that area. And also, as I said, the applicant will be creating all these public improvements along the other side of Ortega Street. So there are modification findings to be made. We provided those to you in your staff report. That is consistent with the general purposes of the zoning ordinance and the zone. It's necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on a lot because the parking lot configuration is a double-loaded parking bay, so both on private and public property, and it benefits both the private and the public. Backing in this location is supportable due to the dead-end nature of the street. And like I said, it will function more like a parking lot. Also, this modification is necessary to construct a housing development project containing affordable residential units. In regard to the parking modification, so to allow less than the required number of parking spaces, I wanted to go over what the parking spaces are. So there's a requirement for 82 spaces, 1 per unit. They are proposing, however, 104 spaces. So 44 spaces would be for 22 units. Those units would have 2 parking spaces each, and those are in the parking lifts. There are 54 units that would have 1 parking space each. So those are the other 54 spaces. So the 6 units that are remaining only have parking at certain hours. And the reason why we've done this, and I'll switch to the site plan on this and zoom in. Because the commercial parking requirement is no longer 12, it's 6. Originally, these were going to be just 6 commercial parking spaces and then 6 residential parking spaces. But we talked to the applicant and internally about the fact that this probably would be better if we could have these all open for commercial parking, at least during the day, provide parking for the project itself and the surrounding businesses. And then the 6 units that would be assigned to these other 6 parking spaces, they would be available to them after hours, so after 6 and on the weekends. So because they're not available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're in need of a parking modification. So it's more of a shared use parking mod, but that's the background on that. So we have findings in relation to that. The project provides shared use of 6 parking spaces between the residential and commercial uses. The need for on-street parking spaces for the proposed commercial uses, as well as existing businesses in the vicinity, resulted in the solution to provide additional commercial spaces on weekdays, so the 12 instead of the 6. And then allow residential parking and guest parking in the evenings. Planning Commission can also add to this finding if there are other unique circumstances that you would like to address. So we've received some letters and some phone calls about construction. So I wanted to go over the 3 particular conditions of approval that are already included in your packet as draft conditions. So on D1D, the haul routes. So we do require the applicant to apply for a public works permit to establish the haul route for all the construction-related trucks. So there's concern of the neighbors of coming into, driving in and out of Ortega Street too often. So this is like any other construction project worked out with Public Works at the time of them getting their permit. And we have heard the neighbors and will work on that accordingly. We do say here, staging for on-site construction shall not occur on Ortega Street. Also, construction, storage, and staging. So it says that construction vehicle, equipment, material storage and staging shall be done on-site. No parking or storage shall be permitted within the public right-of-way unless specifically permitted by the Public Works Director with a permit. Contractors shall submit a separate construction schedule and traffic control plan for the construction of the Ortega Street public improvements. The plan shall consider phasing and temporary access to the businesses on the south side of Ortega Street. This information shall be submitted at least a month prior to pulling the Public Works permit for this phase of the project. And then finally, construction parking. During construction, free parking spaces for workers shall be provided either on-site or at an off-site location, subject to Public Works Director approval. So that leads us to our recommendation. We recommend that the Planning Commission approve the project, making the findings outlined in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A. That concludes my presentation. I also wanted to let you know that we have transportation planning staff here to answer questions if you have any for them.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Commissioner Higgins, did you have a quick question?
Yep. The plans in our staff report, are those the last ones reviewed by ABR? Or have there been changes based on that last hearing?
It's my understanding that there may have been some minor changes, very minor changes since then, yes.
So then, this set doesn't necessarily represent the exact set that was last reviewed.
Yeah, that's true, yes.
Okay, I'll have a question for the applicant about that. Just, I want to make sure I'm understanding the elevations correctly. Just, can somebody explain to me on the elevation where we have a design flood elevation dash line running across the front of the building at about 6 feet up in the air? What is that meant to disclose? Is that a finished floor way up there, or what?
After this question, we'll go to the applicant, and then
Cool.
you can ask the rest of your questions after.
Do I have the correct elevation
that's the
looking
one.
for? So this is in a flood area, so they need to design their residential at this design flood elevation area, I believe.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. And do we have an applicant presentation today? And you'll have 15 minutes for your presentation, and if you can please introduce everyone on your team. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, and I've also got Tony Tomasello and Brian Launder from RRM here if we get into any real detailed questions that I couldn't answer. But I'll do all my best to answer everything. So this project's a little unusual. It's got a development agreement. Most of you were here when the recommendations for the development agreement went forward to City Council, but 2 of you are new. I think you're up to speed on it. Let's go to the next slide. So a development agreement is a contract, and my client and the city have all agreed to the terms of the contract, basically. And it's recorded now, and it's legally binding on both of us. And so there's major parameters of this project that are all established here, and there are things like the number of units, how many affordable units we're doing, the height, setbacks, et cetera. I think Ms. Kennedy did a really good job walking through everything, so I don't need to rehash everything on that. Next slide, please. So I have the elevations in my presentation, but we can just, Ms. Kennedy, you can just blow through these because we just looked at them. Oh, real quick, let's stop on this one though. Commissioner Higgins, your question about this flood elevation. So residential uses have to be 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So you can see that line going through the building there, and over on the left-hand side is where all of our sort of quasi-commercial space is. It can be down at grade, but everywhere else where you see that black line, that's basically a finished floor, or the finished floor would be just a little bit above that. So our residential units are all up above where they need to be. The entrances and things, the main entrances to the building can be at grade, but when you get into a unit itself, it's got to be up above that elevation. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And the next one. And the next one. And the next one. So on this one, we presented this the last time we were before your commission, and I just think it's worth presenting it again because it shows really well how the fourth story is set back from Milpas Street, and it shows how that affects sight lines from the street. So the building is 4 stories, but you really perceive a 3-story mass of the building on Milpas Street. And that's from across the street, which is really where you would perceive it from. When you're standing right next to the building, buildings look the same whether they're 3 stories tall or 10 stories tall because they're next to you 6 feet away. Unless you're looking straight up, it really doesn't change things a whole lot. So that's why we usually present sight lines like this, because the other sight line you would be looking at the sky. Next slide. So this was also presented before, but again, just it's a good exhibit that shows how the massing is stepped back and how this fits in. And, we do have the fortunate situation of some nice established trees on Milpas already. We've got a 2-story building across Ortega Street from us, which sort of begins to step up elevations as you get towards our site. So I think this fits in well in this part of Milpas. Next slide. So Ortega Street has been one of the most discussed things on this project, so I have some slides about that. So this one shows what staff was alluding to before, that it's a street, but it's really acting as a parking lot right now, as you can especially see that down on the south side of the street there. Next slide. So this is looking straight down on the street, existing conditions. And then the next slide. So this is what our improvements would do to the street. And it basically, we're sort of going to formalize that street as a parking area. And we're also going to provide a dedicated sidewalk that's providing access between Milpas and the junior high to the south. And we've got that separated from the actual parking with some landscape buffers. And we think that's going to be a big improvement to what's going on now, which is basically students are walking down the middle of the street and cars are backing out. So we think this will help. So we'll go to the next slide. So on the parking modification, Ms. Kennedy described it. I've got some graphics, again, that we previously presented, but it's a good refresher to go over how this shared parking arrangement works. So these are all the spaces that require a setback modification, and then these are also the ones which are involved with this parking modification. So that's where they are on the site. They are all on our property, so there may have been some question I saw somewhere from a public commenter about the city giving us part of a public street to use as our parking, and that's not happening with this project. Next slide. So during weekdays, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, all of these spaces along Ortega Street are going to be available for commercial parking. I mean, they're basically 90-minute parking, just like any other parking space in the city. So they can serve businesses, they could serve residents, they could serve guests, but there's a limitation so that we don't have resident parking permanently in these spaces. And the other space, which was always intended to be purely residential, remains a residential space at all times, all the way over on the left, or that would be the south. Next slide. So then on Saturdays and Sundays, 6 of those parking spaces become purely residential. On weekends, people are home for longer, and that's how we've worked it out with transportation to have this work as a shared use. So the other spaces remain commercial spaces available to businesses. And next slide. Then on all evenings, we take those 6 commercial spaces at off-peak commercial times, and those now become guest parking spaces for the project. They're dedicated guest parking spaces. A commissioner pointed out on our site visit, and I agree that this is going to lead to some interesting signage that we have to put up to advise everybody of how this all works. But in practicality, there's sort of an attendant at the building because it's such a large building, and when a guest arrives, they're going to have to get some sort of a temporary pass they can put in their car so that we know those are being used for the intended purpose. So it's an advantage. I don't think there's a guest parking requirement in most AUD projects, and I thought this was a good way, working out all of this shared parking, that we can then get the benefit as guest parking outside of peak commercial hours. Next slide. There were some questions about construction that have come up after I had to turn this presentation in, but this slide is actually gives you some additional information besides staff slides. And so what we did here is we've highlighted the areas on our site that are available for construction, storage, and staging. And we've got over half an acre available on this site at all times for construction, storage, and staging. That makes it not that much of a challenge to provide all of the parking and storage on site and to comply with these conditions we have in the project. We've also got a site that's available nearby that one of the owners owns. It's at 111 North Milpas. We've got that available for parking as well if we were to somehow need more parking than we can provide here. And then I think all of the project conditions really address any of the concerns that have come up later in these comments. There was a question about our haul route on Ortega, and it's allowed to be on Ortega. The conditions say that they want us to enter off Milpas Street and leave via Ortega. And if you were to focus in really closely on that little map we have on our staging, we have a sheet in our plans, which is all the different phases of construction, how we're gonna stage them and what areas of the site are used for what. And construction hauling is supposed to leave via Ortega, and that's what it would be doing. There's gonna be a much more detailed plan of this from Public Works before we actually start any construction on this project. I think that's pretty much everything we have here. I can address any other detailed questions you might have outside of my presentation, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gorn. And you'll have 5 minutes and 5 seconds if you want to respond to any public comment.
Great.
Before we go to commissioner questions, we will open up public comment. And we have one public comment speaker so far. If there are any others, please turn them in. But we have Don Scott.
Thank you. Much of what I wish to discuss has been discussed here already, so I'm pleased to hear that people are paying attention. I'm the owner of the D. Alfonso Building, which is home to 7 well-established businesses. We are located directly across Ortega Street from the proposed project. All of the businesses on my property use our Ortega Street parking lot as the primary access for our businesses. I wrote a letter to the commission, which you probably all received on Monday by email, pointing out that according to the plans, the primary staging area designated for both demo and construction deliveries for this project is located in the Capitol Hardware parking lot directly across the street from ours. The staging area is shown on page A2.0 and the hauling route on page C4.0 specifically shows Ortega Street as a designated access. And I think he mentioned that is still a work in progress, I guess. But when you look at the plan, all we see is right across the street from us, that's the center of activity. I have since learned, with the help of Council Member Mike Jordan and your staff member Alan Handel, about the construction conditions set out in the Planning Commission draft conditions of approval. And on page 5 of the draft conditions, and this was mentioned by Ms. Kennedy, that trucks with a gross vehicle weight greater than 3 tons, which is basically a large pickup, require public work permits and specifically preclude from staging on Ortega. Now, of course, they're going to drive through Ortega, but we're concerned, in our minds, we see concrete trucks and dump trucks backed up and lined up on our street. So I'm glad to see that some conditions have been imposed. I know that we will not escape significant disruption during the probable 2 or more years this project will take, but I am asking the commission approve the draft conditions of approval that contains these limitations, and to see that the plans you approve are consistent with those conditions and do not designate Ortega Street as a primary access point for construction traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And do we have another public commenter? Yeah.
If I may, could I have the Milpa Street clip again that showed the Milpa Street view? Oh,
Yeah.
the Milpa Street view that was clicked up earlier.
And for the record, can you state your name, please?
My name is Alex Sanchez.
Thank you.
Yes, I understand that the project is a go-ahead and fine. I'm looking at the fact of the people that live there, including myself. I understand his comments that Ortega Street is going to be kind of a nightmare. And I'm wondering, are there plans to put any lights there? To pull left out of Ortega at a busy point on Milpas is going to back that traffic considerably. The same with making a left off of Ortega on the east side. Now, you have the people turning right on towards Coda. And as you can see, there's a left turn lane there, and cars are parked there. So there are going to be people trying to turn left off of West Ortega, and people trying to turn right towards Coda. Now, you can just imagine that scene with 60 cars coming out of that parking. Are there any plans for any type of transportation control, for lights, for roundabouts, or whatever might be in the planning?
During public comment, we can't answer, but we are
Okay.
taking notes.
So you just wanted to comment? Okay. Also, are there any plans for handicap parking on Ortega, since it's going to be public? And my wife is handicapped, and we do go see our grandchildren at the junior high for sports after school and what have you. And the only way I can get there is to go in through Ortega and park there, or else I'll have to wheel her from a considerable distance. So as of now, we've been parking there on Ortega, and we've been able to enjoy our grandchildren over there. But now I wonder if that's going to halt that, and not just for me, but for other people that live there. I had one other thought, but I've lost it here. So for now, those are important issues for the people that live there and for myself. Also, one more thing. Who's going to patrol that area as far as public parking? I mean, how do we know there isn't going to be a van parked there? And as they do on Milpas, they patrol it because it's a street sweeper. But if not, those vans will be parked on Milpas for a month. So what is the process of policing that area?
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Your time is up.
No more?
No. 3 minutes.
All right,
It's public
thank you.
comment. Thank you. Are there any other public comment speakers? Doesn't look like it, so we will, Oh,
We
Ms.
do
Fennessy.
have Zoom public commenters.
thank you.
Let me go ahead and unmute Ann Hefferman.
Thank you, Commissioners. As a 28-year resident and a neighbor of this project, I have the following concerns at this juncture of the approval process. Regarding sensitivity to context, This project is not compatible with the neighborhood. It's disproportionate in its height, massive in its scale, and inadequate in its available parking relative to its occupancy. It will decrease available parking in the neighborhood, which is already impacted, especially on the weekends. Businesses still operate on the weekends. The shop across the street from this project hugely impacts the neighborhood on the weekends. It will impact traffic and safety on and around a major corridor, especially in the morning rush hour, which includes transportation to 4 local schools on the east side, but also during lunchtime and in the afternoon when the schools let out. Regarding construction, with the demolition and construction taking place during school hours, there will be fuel emissions, hazardous dust, noise pollution, that will directly affect the students at the junior high, mainly in the outdoor spaces which are directly adjacent. This will also impact the neighboring residents and businesses. The construction phase will have the same impacts on traffic and safety and parking mentioned previously, but it will be even worse. So I ask you to please consider this application carefully with these things in mind. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Natalia Gavoni. Natalia, I have unmuted you.
Good afternoon, Chair, and Commissioners. Though I appreciate the architectural change from modern to Spanish style, this project still screams large and imposing for the Milpas corridor, as it will permanently change the character of the East Side District forever. Allowing these developers to expand the fitness room coupled with a business center that will include conference rooms adds more pressure to an existing weak infrastructure, as well as more traffic and congestion on our streets and in our neighborhoods. So that being said, will these developers provide parking for this commercial space, or is this considered an amenity of this particular project? Next, the June 27th date. Is that date for the Planning Commission actions or the date for ABR PDA? Finally, what are the provisions to keep this property as rental housing in perpetuity? Because as many of you are aware, there are many developers who turn them into hotel rooms after obtaining permits from this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fennessy, do we have any other online public speakers?
Thank you. We do not have any more remote public speakers, but we did receive 3 written correspondence letters that were distributed to the commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And to the applicant team, would you like to use any of your leftover time to respond?
Yes, Chair Escobedo, Commissioners, I'll respond to a couple of the comments that we had. In terms of Mr. Sanchez's comments, yes, we do have accessible spaces we're providing on Ortega, and they're actually compliant accessible spaces that meet all the dimensions that are required in the California Accessibility Code versus just some on-street space that happens to be close to wherever they're going. We're also, the pedestrian route that we're improving has to meet all accessibility requirements as well. So our improvements to Ortega are going to be a big improvement in terms of accessibility along that corridor. In terms of Ms. Hefferman's comments, look, every project has to be constructed, right? Every time a project comes in front of the city, everybody gets bent out of shape over the fact that there's going to be construction, as if it's this like unique thing that's unique to whatever project it is. Projects have to be built, and it's not the most comfortable thing in the world for everybody, but it's something that we all as a society have to put up with if we want to have the results of the projects that we want, especially housing projects. And on this site here, we have the luxury of over half an acre of staging space. It makes it a lot easier to build a project like this here than what your commission's gonna see on every project that comes in with the city's vision of doing these higher density projects downtown. So I think, you know, if we as a community want to have housing projects, we have to be comfortable with the fact that they have to be built and that there are some short-term temporary impacts of that. And I guess I'm saying that more for Ms. Hefferman's and the public's benefit than for your commission's benefit. I think you all understand this. In terms of this concept that these projects are developed and then they're all surreptitiously converted into short-term rentals, that's like a new thing that housing opponents are bringing up. And it's a fairy tale to convert these units. If even one of these units was being operated as a short-term rental, the city would be all over it instantaneously. The city vigorously and enthusiastically enforces against the use of long-term residential units as short-term rentals. And that's even for, you know, little single-family homes and things that are out there that aren't subject to pages of conditions and recorded agreements like this project is. So I'm not concerned about that, but I don't think there's a reason for anyone to be concerned about this concept. It's just not a real thing. So those are my responses to comments. And again, I'm available for any other questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Gorin. And then we will bring it back to the commission for questions, and we'll start with Commissioner Higgins.
Mr. Gorin, could you put up your exhibit that shows the right-of-way, I'm sorry, the construction staging areas? Or can Ms. Kennedy help with that?
Yeah, I think staff has our actual plan set. It's not in my presentation. I think Commissioner Higgins is looking for our actual C sheet out of the plan set, which shows all 4 phases.
It was the site plan with the beige looking.
Oh, that is in my presentation, that one right there.
So I'm not going to make a big deal out of this at all because I agree with your sentiments about construction, and the more constraints we put on construction, the longer a project takes, so extending the pain for a neighborhood. But I just want to just ask a question. The condition of approval says staging for on-site construction shall not occur on Ortega Street, but it looks like if that's Ortega Street in beige, that would be a staging area?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Higgins, the portion you see there in beige is actually on our property. The shaded area ends at our property line, and the Ortega Street right-of-way is all in white on the opposite side of that line.
Okay. So we don't have to approve a mod for you for that then, I guess?
No.
Don't answer that. That's just.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with you, Mr. Gorin. When we saw the project in July of 2021, and in the development agreement that was subsequently included a project description, Exhibit B, it talked about the project includes a fitness area and a business center with 2 conference rooms that shall be restricted to use by the residents. Now, the plan that we have in this set does not show the conference center, and I think, what did it say in the project description? 2 conference rooms. I think it was 1 large and 1 small. So could you explain to me how this is reconfigured on sheet A1 to include these little work pad spaces and then something that looks like it's called, sorry, I have to go back through my notes. It's called a co-work club room. So is that replacing the business center, and what exactly does that mean, and why did the name change? Because the project description in section B is part of, Exhibit B is part of the development agreement.
Yeah, Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, I think it's more a function of terminology than a change. It's the exact same square footage as
It isn't.
before.
It's very different. I've compared the 2 plans. I'll I'll differ with you on that. The configuration is different from what we saw in July versus, and I, quite frankly, did the comparison by holding it up to a window in my house and tracing the outlines. But the, the retail space was 1,365 square feet, and you've added retail storage and something else, I think the restroom. So that's come down a little bit into the gym space. And then we never had these workout rooms before, and we never had these work pod areas before, and we've lost what appears, there's a conference room, but then there's a lot of storage that wasn't on the plan that we saw in July. There's parcel rooms and package storage, and we seem to have lost the business center, which has become the co-work clubhouse or club room. And I don't know what that means, but I want to know
I'd
why the definition
be happy to
has
answer
changed.
you.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you started to answer me, and I'm telling you that they're not the same. So,
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, the square footage of that area is exactly the same as it was before, and it's the perimeter of it is the same as it was before, and it's a fixed pie. And we have reallocated some minor spaces within that, and they're all the same uses as they were before. It isn't unusual as you refine a project to make minor changes to the interior. The interior designer, the business center before, it's not a FedEx office. It's a space for residents to be able to come down and have access to printers, and that's what a club co-work space is. It's like Kiva Workspace over on State Street, where people have access to shared business amenities. You could call it a co-work clubhouse, a business center, a work center. I don't think that relabeling it or making minor shifts between those uses within the same area of the building strays in any material way from what this commission looked at or what the city council approved.
okay, well, I'm just telling you that in the project description, it's very specific about having a business center and having a large conference room and a small conference room, and they don't appear on the plan set that we have. So I'm not trying to give you a hard time, I'm just trying to get an explanation, and you've added these rooms that are package rooms, package storage, mail storage, or whatever they are, that have cut into the space. And I'm not criticizing the fact that you need these things, because you do when you reconfigured the space, but the conference room is substantially reduced by the parcel and package room. And then the retail space is increased to include the storage and the restroom. And that's fine, but and then you've added the 2 workout rooms. So, and is the gym the same size as it was in the July plans?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, it's slightly smaller than it was.
Okay, okay. That makes sense, because the retail space has come down and the, looks like the conference rooms come down. So I would agree with that, okay. It's slightly smaller than that. Okay, I'm just trying to get an explanation, because the development agreement is very specific about that for whatever reason, and I don't know. So I'm just trying to make sure that the development agreement, what we're seeing is consistent with the development agreement if the name has changed. So, okay, that's great. And then, I think my other, okay. I wanted to go to the local preference program that's discussed in your letter, and it's also stated in the development agreement. It's actually RRM's letter, not Vanguard's letter. So have you figured out ways to strive for, and I understand it's not a condition of approval, but ways to strive for a local preference program?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, we haven't really gone into detail developing that
Okay.
yet. We're more focused on
On the-
getting through the design approvals,
Right.
and then that's something that we'll spend a lot of time on and you know, make sure the city attorney is happy with it. But that's been our goal all along, and we hope we can do it and don't run into any obstacles with fair housing or anything. And it looks that there should be ways that we can do that.
Okay, and is there a handicap parking space on Ortega? I can't, I thought I saw one. There is one, isn't there?
Two. Yeah, we've got 2 spaces.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that was asked. Okay, I think that's all I have for you. I wanted to ask about Mr. Sanchez, was that who it was? Ms. Swanson, maybe you know the answer to that. He asked about traffic lights or traffic controls at that intersection, and I'm sure you've looked at that, so could you address that for me, please? Thank you.
Sure. Chelsea Swanson with Transportation Planning, Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Wiscombe. I believe the question was related to why there may not be a traffic signal proposed at this intersection. The project has been fully vetted by our traffic engineering staff. It doesn't rise to the level of needing a traffic signal at this location. Partly it's a dead-end street, so you're not going to have that crosstown traffic coming through. It's going to be, you have 2 options to access the site. That also helps with the flow. You're not all forced to Ortega Street. You can also use Milpas. So it just doesn't rise to the level of requiring a traffic signal at this location.
Okay, and then I appreciate that. That answers Mr. Sanchez's question, I think. One of his questions, sorry. And then my other question was about, I finally found it in the conditions of approval, the sidewalks on both sides of Ortega. That's what the C of A says, I think, that they will install sidewalks on both sides of Ortega. Is that right? Because it looked to me like it was only.
There will be sidewalk on both sides. On the project side, it is, it's an unusual frontage, as we all know, because of the parking configuration, sort of straddling the property line. So the sidewalk will be on the project site. It also doesn't, it terminates on the project site. And that's, the existing condition is going to remain with the school access on the south side of Ortega. So that's where the sidewalk connects between the junior high and Milpas Street now, and that's going to maintain the main point of pedestrian access with the school.
Because Mr. Gorin said sidewalk with landscaping on that side, so kids can they can take that route to junior high. And so you'll make sure that that sidewalk is actually connected to, I don't remember what it connects to get to the junior high, but you'll make sure it goes all the way through so that kids safely can get.
Yeah, it will connect basically from the junior high access point all along Ortega to Milpas. So
Yeah, it's got that funny little thing in it. Yeah, so.
Right.
So that funny little thing will be installed then
yes.
at the
yes.
bulb at the end
Yep,
of Ortega.
that was always the
Yeah.
intent, to maintain that that access point, that connection to the school. So
Okay.
that'll remain.
Great, okay, thank you for that. And then I think that's all I had for you, Ms. Swanson. Thank you for coming today. And then I just had one question, I think, for Ms. Ostringer. And that's, could we add to the conditions of approval that the owner agrees to strive for a local preference program? I know they're not required to have one, they're very difficult to implement, but can we have something that has language that says that they will strive for a local preference program?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, it wouldn't be a recorded condition. Ms. DeBus could help you probably find a place to put it, but the language would have to be very consistent with what we see in the Exhibit B project description. And I think that would probably satisfy what you're looking for when it says reasonable and good faith efforts to implement local preference.
Yeah, I was looking at page 14 of 92, where we go into rental housing restrictions, and maybe language, there's section A and B there, maybe C would be a place to insert that they will, Mr. Gordon has something to say about it, yeah.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wiscombe, I think we have the language you're looking for in the conditions currently, and this came out of our last Planning Commission hearing. We were asked to do this. We had
Right.
always sort of been talking about it, and your commission formalized it into this condition, and it's little c number 2 on, looks like page 18 in the conditions, which says owners will use good faith efforts to implement a local leasing preference.
Great,
Specifically
okay.
for local teachers,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Sorry about that, I missed that, but I wanted to make sure that that got in there, that's great.
Just
That's
glad we
perfect-
saved time drafting it.
Perfect language, okay. I think that's all the questions that I had. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. We'll go to Commissioner Lodge and then Vice Chair Bonderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In looking at the plans, well, that are up on the screen there now, and going from, this is for transportation, in going from parallel parking to right-angle parking, are there more parking spaces than there are now?
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Lodge, typically when you go from a parallel parking arrangement to a 90-degree like this, you do gain parking spaces. It's a little unique right now how Ortega functions. As you saw, I think in the presentation, people don't necessarily always park parallel. It's sort of, there's no sidewalk, curb, gutter there. So it's a little bit of a free-for-all in how people park currently. But if they were to park parallel in line that you would on any other typical street, it should be a net gain in parking.
Okay, thank you. And then I can't help wondering, this is for the applicant, how are you going to manage? I understand there will have to be some elaborate signage, but how are you going to manage which tenants use the Ortega Street parking? Will there be assigned spaces, and some people will just have to?
Chair Escobedo,
With what's
Commissioner
left over?
Lodge, every parking space in the project is assigned to a unit. So these 6 spaces will be assigned to 6 specific units, and every other space in our entire parking lot is also assigned to a specific unit. So that's how that will work.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm glad it was cleared up the conditions that appear on the plans regarding construction and so on. I'm glad I was going to ask about that, but that's been cleared up. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Excuse me. Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Vice Chair Bonderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to keep us on this slide, and I'm curious to develop some of the thoughts that we've just heard a little bit further. First, I'd like to express my appreciation on the solutions that you have found, both as the applicant team as well as the transportation staff, to increase parking in this format. It's really thoughtful. I am concerned about the fact that on the project side that we have a sidewalk that just ends. And the reason I bring that up is because we all know that a lot of people, especially possibly teenagers, aren't necessarily willing or thoughtful enough to cross the street to where there may be a sidewalk. For whatever reason, it's faster. Perhaps as a population, we might be lazy and want the straightest path. But in any case, I'm interested in knowing, perhaps from the applicant team first, or transportation, whoever has an answer, what it might entail to continue that sidewalk through the parking area and again, connect with the existing sidewalk that I'm assuming dead ends off of the project site. What's actually happening as far as that condition of the site is concerned? The area off of what we see, what's happening there? Am I correct to assume that the sidewalk just dead ends?
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bonderson, the sidewalk dead ends now, and down in that corner, gosh, it's like dirt and some landscaping thing that's there, and it's fenced off to the school. So the entrance to the school is actually over on the other side of Ortega Street. I share your view that humanity tends to be lazy sometimes. People may come down this walkway. I think once they get down to the bottom of it, it's safe to just walk across it. It's not like we have street traffic there, and it's at the very end of Ortega Street where there really isn't traffic. There's no through traffic there. There'd be some traffic from our driveway onto Ortega, but there's not like free-flowing traffic that any pedestrians are stepping in front of. So I don't think there's a way really to extend that sidewalk through without being at the expense of parking. And just overall, in terms of priorities, our priority is to provide the parking.
I got that loud and clear. Thank you, Mr. Gorin. My next question is, based on the state mandated code, what is the maximum required parking for handicap on this property? Is it 2? Is it the 2 that you've demonstrated here?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner or Vice Chair
actually,
Bonderson. Yeah, we actually have 2 out of our 12 spaces on Ortega, which is beyond what the requirement is.
That's what I wanted to hear. And my other question with regard to that is that it's not assigned parking, right? It's free parking for first come, first serve.
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bonderson, that's correct. The accessible spaces are, at all times, they're either commercial parking or guest parking.
Okay, and to follow up with Mr. Sanchez's concerns about, the demand for parking going up and therefore potentially the demand for the handicap spots going up, I'm interested to ask Ms. Swanson, on behalf of the city, how many spots were existing before? Have they been replaced, and have any additional handicap spots been added on near this project and also adjacent to this project elsewhere as part of this plan?
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Bonderson, just to clarify, I think you're referring to within the right-of-way, how many
Yes.
ADA spaces? I don't believe there are any existing ADA spaces on Ortega Street currently, so this would be all new ADA parking for the public to use.
Thank you very much. And to respond directly to Mr. Sanchez, that would include the 2 spots. There would be 2 additional spots that were not there before.
That's correct, yes.
And from the city's standpoint, not from the project, the applicant standpoint, but from the city standpoint, is there potential to add any additional handicap spots in or around this area since we are adjacent to a public school?
We do get requests from time to time from the public to look at on-street accessible parking. So it's something that could be explored if that were desired or there was a demand for it. That's something definitely that we could look into, sure.
I assume that's outside of this project, is that correct?
That process, yes, would be done through our Public Works Department to look at that, if it was
Excellent.
requested, yeah.
Yes, and I hope that the public and whoever may be interested in this topic heard you, that outside of this project, that requests can be made to Public Works. Moving on, thank you, Ms. Swanson. Moving on, I wanted to engage you one more time, Ms. Swanson. When Commissioner Wiscombe asked you the questions about the lights at Milpas and Ortega. Unfortunately, I had some sort of a volume glitch. I'm not sure if it was an issue that anyone online might have heard or if it was on my end. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to repeat the information that you stated before for anyone who may have missed it, including myself. Can you please share what, if any, anything is taking place to improve that intersection?
Sure, Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Bonderson. With regard to the question from the public, it was about whether a traffic signal should go in at this location. And I mentioned earlier that our traffic engineer is heavily involved in all of our land development projects, especially larger ones. And we look at the net new trips that are going to be coming from a project and how the circulation pattern will work. And based on the number of net new trips from this project, and also the fact that Ortega Street is not a through street, so you're going to have very minimal traffic on Ortega. It doesn't rise to the level of needing a traffic signal at this location. The overall changes, as you'll notice, Ortega Street and Milpas, it's going to appear more like a parking lot entrance. It's going to be a narrower driveway. So we would expect sort of behavior like you're entering a parking lot more than a through street, so sometimes slower speeds, just the way it's designed. And then, of course, the improvements on Milpas, I believe we're getting a 4-foot dedication just for pedestrian improvements for the sidewalk corridor, so that's going to be a nice addition from the project as well.
Thank you. How will the turning lane be handled from Milpas crossing oncoming traffic into this street? Is there a turning lane being added? I mean, how are we preventing the obstruction of traffic for people who are waiting to turn?
We'll see if we can get an aerial up. My understanding at this point in time is that I think there might be a turn lane there now. I don't believe there is proposed striping changes, again, from our traffic engineer. It's always something that can be looked at if we're seeing an issue coming out of a new development, but it was thoroughly examined over the last several years in the development of the project. So I think, okay. I think the configuration right now is proposed to stay the same. And I believe if we can zoom in that there is a turn lane there. So it will continue to function as it does today.
And I'm assuming that parking lot here and crossing traffic to turn left onto Milpas would just, because there's no traffic light there, would just make its way out as needed? Just like you would on any other cross street that doesn't have a light?
That's correct, yes.
Very good. Thank you for your explanation. I sincerely appreciate you having to repeat yourself. Sorry about the inconvenience. I have a question for staff. I don't know which staff member would be best for this, but I'd like to explore the comment made by Ms. Gavoni about how we can prevent future hotel conversions from units like this or projects like this. Do we have anything that talks about that in our code currently? Or is there a way to condition this somehow if we decide that that's the path we'd like to take?
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Branderson, first of all, I think project description, this is a residential project, so these are long-term residential uses. Hotels are short-term. I mean, that's what we focus on. So if we hear about this being rented for shorter term, then we would investigate like any other project. I don't think we would necessarily add anything to this as conditions of approval, but it's they need to follow with the existing conditions and follow the development agreement, which outlines what the project is.
Okay, and Oh,
Excuse me,
pardon me.
Vice Chair Bonderson, just to add on to that, this is being developed at AUD priority densities, and so it is required to remain consistent with those densities. So that would ensure at least a minimum number remain as rental units. And if the applicant were proposing to change any rental units, it would need to go through the process because, as mentioned by Ms. Kennedy, it would then be commercial or non-residential square footage rather than residential. So that would require a approval.
And Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Bonderson, this one gets a three-point answer. This project, if approved for the height, is a community benefit project that's being approved because it is rental units. And so the project can't, to take advantage of that height, it has to remain rental.
Thank you. And is there any, maybe Ms. Ostringer, I'm guessing this question goes to you. Is there any sort of expiration date on development like this where a entire building can be converted in the far future to another use? In this case, into a hotel, for example, or a long stay, extended stay type of hotel?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, I think it kind of ties into Ms. DeBusk's answer and as well as mine with the community benefit. The project as vested is getting that extra height because it is rental. So unless the by right changes to 60 feet throughout the city, I don't see how this project would be changed from residential.
Thank you. That's extremely clear to me now. I appreciate the three-part answer. Tag team. I have one final question, and it was something I noticed on the plans as well, very specifically in concurrence with Commissioner Wiscombe. She brought it up and stole my thunder, but I wanted to go back to level 1 floor plan. I have a question about the conference rooms. I believe the answer with regard to the project description has been asked. I'm curious to know, first and foremost, if this will require a modification of the project description. Is that a question for Ms. Deisty, perhaps?
Ms. Kennedy.
Could you repeat that question,
Oh,
please?
excuse me. My apologies. Ms. Kennedy, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was, since there is a change in some of the uses that reflects in the project description, is this a moment in which we would need to update the project description to match?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, I'll take this one, and then Ms. Kennedy can follow up. The development agreement in the project description identifies it as the specific square footage of non-residential, and then it calls out 2 conference rooms and a fitness center. So when we approved the development agreement, we weren't approving the plans or the internal configuration, and so the development agreement project description, I think, still fits within what's being shown on the plans.
And I'm assuming it's because the square footage of that use remains the same. It doesn't matter what types of uses are in there?
Correct in part. The uses in there does need to be 2, I believe it's 2 conference rooms and a fitness center. And that is specified in the project description for the development agreement. So, but how that's configured isn't specified in the development agreement.
That is precisely what I was expecting, actually. So that brings me to my follow-up question, and this goes to Mr. Gorin. As Commissioner Wiscombe mentioned, there seems to only be 1 conference room here. Do you have another conference room indicated on here that I'm not seeing, or implying another conference-type space?
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bonderson, we didn't specifically label it a conference room. I mean, if it is like really critical to the city that there be 2 conference rooms, I don't think this was a major issue as we were reviewing this project over the last 2 years, but if the city demands 2 conference rooms, we could relabel a space as a conference room.
I'll defer to Ms. Ostringer, because what I hear is that the the definition of 2 conference rooms is important. I don't want to tell you one way or another. Ms. Ostringer?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Bonderson, I think the city could refuse to approve the plans if one of the rooms was not labeled a conference room.
There you go.
Could I
So-
ask a question on this? Doesn't the city also have the ability to find the revised thing consistent with the development agreement? Ultimately, it's up to the planning commission to determine if we're being consistent with the development agreement terms, and then ultimately city council. So if the city determines that our co-work space is an okay use as well, we could just memorialize that through these plans. But that's just, I guess, my question. I guess I'm maybe out of line in the rules of order here, but
Chair
maybe
Escobedo,
consider that.
I can answer it if.
Yes. Ms. Ostringer, can Planning Commission use a co-work space and define that as the same use as a boardroom or meeting space?
That decision, per the development agreement, would be at the community development director level. There is a provision in the development agreement that allows the community development director to find that it's consistent. Perhaps in comments, if commissioners want to comment on that, that may be something that the community development director would consider.
If I may take some privilege here. A question for you, Ms. Ostringer. Why were 2 conference rooms called out in the project description? It seems strange. I know it was a part of the negotiation, but
The Chair Escobedo, that's actually more of a question for the applicant.
Mr. Gorin.
Yeah, Chair Escobedo, that's what the floor plans were at the time. I mean, they're conceptual floor plans. That was the idea for the use of that space at the time. And as they've been further refined, we've further refined the ideas for that space. But that's the reason for the change. I don't remember any discussion at any previous hearing about how critical these conference rooms for our residents were.
Noted. Thank you.
Chair Escobedo, I
yes,
just want to
Ms.
mention too
Kennedy.
that I recall the most important part of that sentence is that it's restricted to the residential. We were just trying to point out that these were amenities, but they were for the residential use, not for another commercial use.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. That's really helpful. Vice Chair Bonderson, did you have any other questions?
Yes, I just want to wrap up this thought, and then I will be finished. This is actually my last set of questions. It's such an interesting conversation. I'm assuming that the conference rooms, as Ms. Kennedy mentioned, is, if it's for the residents, then I'm assuming that they're not inviting a lot of people in, and you don't need a bigger space. But the question I have specifically is the conference room that we show here as labeled conference room. Mr. Gorin, how many people do you assume would fit in that space? The reason I ask is because it's only slightly larger than a 1-person restroom that's next to it. So I'm wondering, is a conference room aimed for 2 or 3 people, or is it an actual meeting room for other uses, like a HOA meeting or something like that? What was the intention here?
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bonderson, it's intended for like 4 or 5 people to meet and like have a meet. It's not a community meeting facility or to have, there is no HOA because this is a rental project, and it's not, our intent isn't to host large gatherings there.
Okay. I will just end with a thought for your design team. I'm just interested to know if you plant a table in there, how many people you can actually fit in there with appropriate room to move. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Otherwise, I appreciate the conversation, and I personally don't have a problem, accepting the co-work room as a meeting room as well. Just basically depends on how you furnish it, if there's a group table. So we might need to talk about that further in our deliberations. Thank you for the time. Back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. And I want to refocus us a little bit on what discretionary applications we have and We have height exemption, front setback modification, and parking modification. So with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Bauke, followed by Commissioner Wardlow.
Chair Bonner, Chair Escobedo, I have a number of questions of staff and some for the applicant, and I'll start with, since we're sort of on this subject, my reading of the development agreement to the city attorney is we're limited to it on its face and what's in Exhibit B. We're not limited to a particular set of floor plans that we've been seeing. Is that correct or incorrect?
Chair Escobedo, Vice Chair Bauke. Yes, however, to the extent that the density is already set and established within, and the height through the development agreement, which lends itself to how the project, the interior is laid out. And as far as I don't think any of the discretionary approvals are subject to an interior review of the layout of the project.
Okay, thank you. All right, questions for staff, and I have many, and some of them probably are, this project's got a long history, and some of us haven't lived that history, and need to sort of wrap ourselves around how we got here. First question I have to the staff, Ms. Kennedy, is the affordability requirements. I see a comment in the letter from RRM saying that there would be a 10% inclusionary requirement under the current standards. Was this project proposed prior to an inclusionary requirement, or is it now not subject to one because it is rental housing? You had none. And that's my question. My question is, your original one had none, correct?
Correct, yes.
And
Chair
the city does have
Escobedo.
an inclusionary requirement,
So this-
correct? And there's an inclusionary ordinance I read last night. And I presume the reason why there was none, even though there was an inclusionary requirement, is because this is rental housing. Is that correct or
This-
incorrect?
This was not subject to the ordinance originally.
Okay, so it's just because it's a timing thing. So this, we now have an inclusionary requirement. Okay.
Correct.
That's trying to get the facts right here historically. Could you go through and show us where the affordable housing units are as currently proposed and where they've been in its history? They seem to be moving around. I'd like to understand where they were and where they are now.
So there were no affordable units before, so there are
Right.
only now affordable units in this
Okay.
new project. There weren't any before. So where they're
Okay.
located, if you do look at your staff report, I did show on page 5 of 92, there's a table showing where they are on each floor. So on the first floor, there are 10 affordable units.
And where on the first floor are those 10? That's my
So we'll
question.
zoom in, and they're labeled with A. So if we look up here, those that are labeled A are the affordable units. So all these here. And actually, all 10 of the 10 on the first floor are affordable. So all
Okay.
these units are affordable. On the second floor, 6 of the 28 are. So this one here, you can see the cursor.
Okay.
It's an affordable unit. Here, here, here. Here. So there are 6 on this floor.
Okay.
And that is it. So there are 10 on the first floor and 6 on the second floor.
And am I correct in my understanding that the 16 units are going to be deed restricted in the moderate category, which I think is a good thing, considering what we saw at the Housing Element Workshop, in which I think we had a whole production of a whole 4 during the last cycle, and so at least we'll go from 4 to 20. Is that correct? That it's in that category, they had 4 in the Housing Element presentation? And not the next click up, which we have many?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Question to you and also to the applicant. If parking becomes a problem, is there an opportunity for more park lifts on this property? Could it be feasible if there was a parking problem?
That would be for the applicant.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Balke, anything's feasible with enough money. But no, there isn't really a feasible way to do it without significantly revising this project beyond the scope of what we've agreed to with the city in this development agreement. And it would be unique amongst AUD projects in the city of Santa Barbara to have some sort of long-term monitoring of a parking requirement and trigger 15 years from now, if there's a parking requirement, if there was a parking problem, they'd have to reconstruct this project and install more lifts. I mean, we're proposing a project that complies with the conditions that the city has today and that meets the ordinance parking requirements today. And the way that ordinance requirements work in the city is that if ordinance requirements change later, you retain your non-conforming use, and if a condition changes later, your project is approved the way it's approved. So we would pretty vigorously oppose any sort of a condition to somehow monitor parking and have to revisit it and reconstruct the project later. So that's where we're at.
It's more a question of physically, could it be done? Was there like some open court areas in which you could just put another lift? I'm asking that question because you might someday have a marketability problem, which you might want to solve on your own. I just wanted to know if that was even a feasible, because there's comments from the community in both written and oral comments that there's going to be this potential parking problem. At least
Okay.
they perceive it. I was just wondering if they become something, could that be an answer to the question?
Okay, I'll try to answer the question you were actually asking then, which is what you just clarified. So if for some reason we wanted to add more parking to this project, it would potentially be possible by turning that entire row of parking spaces next to the school into a multi-story parking structure. But to do anything like that, we'd have to come back and get discretionary approvals from the city and design review and everything else. And that would only be in a case where we, for whatever reason, elected to do it to address a marketing issue, I guess, as you say.
Right. Okay. While I have you up there, I have 2 questions which you'll think are maybe a little off base, but I want to ask them and put them on the record. Do you have a projection what the commercial square foot release rate's going to be for the retail location?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Balke, no idea.
If I may, I'm going to jump in. Our questions and our discussion have to be related to either the height exemption findings, the parking, or the setback modification. Getting into the commercial space, and we've kind of gotten off track a little bit today.
It is related to the parking.
Okay,
I mean,
I apologize.
it does generate parking. So I'm trying to understand this project.
If in terms of the parking, we meet the parking per the city's requirement. I think we're meeting it at 1 per 250, which is pretty standard retail parking rate. And then as a result of our shared parking arrangement, we're actually providing double the city's requirement for commercial parking during peak commercial hours.
Okay. Got a number of questions to staff on the conditions of approval. First question is on the rental housing restriction section. These are going to be deed restricted. Who is going to enforce and manage the, we'll call it the sorting of applicants? Is this going to be done by the city's housing authority, the applicant, or the authority under contract to the applicant? How is that going to be managed, and how is this local preference program going to work in real time?
I would have to defer to our housing staff. They handle that and work it out with the applicant. But I don't know off the top of my head how this particular one would work.
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Balke, generally, what would happen with an AUD project is the applicant would submit what's called a moderate income housing plan, which identifies the units and, more importantly, identifies what their marketing plan is. So that's something that would be reviewed by city housing staff.
Okay. Condition number 9, the residential permit parking program. Could you explain why the residents cannot participate in that and what the rationale for that is?
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Balke, excuse me. I believe that is a pretty standard condition of approval. The residential parking permit program is in specific areas of the city. There isn't a residential parking permit program in this area, so if there were one, then they wouldn't be able to participate. I think the idea is they're meeting demand, parking demand, with the spaces they have available on site, and that is the intent.
Okay, to Ms. Kennedy, could you bring up the historical slides I asked you to add to the presentation? I'm trying to understand the evolution. I think the public deserves an understanding of the evolution of this project. Could you outline to the public the changes from the commercial that was proposed in 2016? You know, where it was?
So if you look at this site plan, which was from, so the design approval in June of 2016, the retail was along Milpas. There was a lot more retail proposed as part of this project and extended across the whole building in the front along Milpas. And now, as you know, it's been just reduced to the corner area.
And then it was changed again in the next slide that you had, which was the last version of the plan in which ABR saw before the development agreement. I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands what's going on here. And we've got the commercial at the corner, correct? And then some residential units, and as the applicant expressed, as along Ortega Street, there's a few residential units there, but we now have basically filled in the frontage along Milpas Street with residential units. That's pretty consistent to where we're now have a project. This, you know, the floor plans that we see today have that. Okay. Question as to the condition regarding design review. Could you explain whether the two conditions, both the screening backflow device and the location of dry utilities, would allow, in any case, anything to ever be put in the frontage along Milpas?
So these are standard conditions to make sure if in fact those are put in that area, that they are screened. So
But the question is,
So-
could you put, I mean, under these conditions, can you get to a point that you don't have some big green boxes on the Milpas frontage?
there could potentially be some,
Okay,
yes.
that's my question. Another question as to, and this is on the public improvements. What is the design section on Milpas? There seems to be an easement or a grant or a dedication ultimately leading to some enlarged sidewalk. So what do we get? Do we get a curb, some parkway width of some sort? Don't know what that number is. We can't read the plans that easily. And then we have a sidewalk of some distance. So what does that ultimately cross-section look like?
I'll switch over to the more current plan.
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Bauke, the pedestrian improvements on Milpas Street would include a 4-foot dedication of easement to get a wider sidewalk corridor. We're following the recommended dimensions of our pedestrian master plan for a right-of-way of this width. It calls for a 6-inch curb, a 4-foot parkway or tree well area, an 8-foot sidewalk, and then a 2.5-foot frontage zone, which is really on the private property, sort of a buffer between the building and the back of sidewalk. So overall, we're getting 4 additional feet of width in the sidewalk corridor on Milpas Street.
So it'd go to 12 feet, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's the only comments I have. I do have a number of commentaries, which I will hold for later.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate everyone's comments, and thank you, Commissioner Bauke for sorry about that, guys. And thank you, Commissioner Bauke, for many of the questions that you asked. I really have just one question. So given the 2016 plans had commercial retail space, and now we have more, at least units, that's great, but it's going to be on the front-facing Milpas. How was that decision made, and is there any, can you walk me through the trade-off of that? Because when you mentioned that you had no concept of what the cost of the commercial space would be today, how did you guys decide, okay, we're going to switch out all of the commercial and we're going to put in more amenities? And was that a decision that the applicant made, or was something that the city that we, approved and agreed with and all that?
I hate to do this again, but we have to keep our conversation and questions pertaining to the findings that we have to make for today's discretionary approvals.
So my question to that is that when we're making the decision that that this project is a community benefit based on, and we need to do the height exemption, I feel that, I'm happy that this is in some ways a community benefit because it's creating rental housing, but the fact that we are still wildly below in our ability to address the 3 categories of housing that is not being addressed in this project, I feel like there's a lack of a community benefit. So I just wanted to understand how we've reduced that benefit now by taking away. By taking away the commercial front space, we've reduced the public benefit because you're giving that space now to the internal residents, right? So the community benefit has been reduced since the 2016 plans, and I just wanted to understand, was that the city agreed to this and said, no worries, we can do amenity space instead of the commercial, or was that strictly an applicant decision? And why?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wardlow, that was an applicant decision. We looked at the previously designed retail space and didn't find it to be a really viable traditional retail space for hosting a community-faced retail operation. And we wanted to change it and provide amenities to our tenants in this building. So what we were trying to come up with is, we don't want to have, I guess you describe it sometimes, or you could describe it where you've got sort of a pedestrian desert on a building frontage where it's completely separate from the sidewalk and there's no portion of the building engaging the neighborhood. We wanted to find something that would still engage the neighborhood with a retail looking frontage and prominent entryways and things like that, but that would be useful to our tenants. Ultimately, we thought that that space would be more valuable as amenities to the tenants in this building than as a marginally performing retail space. And yet, we think we can still accomplish the same benefits to the community as a retail space, short of them being able to walk into the space, in terms of seeing it and experiencing it and being related to the public way. That's why we decided to make this change, but still keep that sort of a frontage. And we could have made that space into more units. The city would have
That was
loved
my it next if we
question.
made
Made it into more units.
That was my definite next
But
question.
it would have created a complete disconnect from the sidewalk. Those units would have to be up above that flood elevation. This type of space doesn't, and so this is the trade-off that we
Okay.
went for.
Well, okay, well, that does make sense. I appreciate that explanation. I have to respectfully disagree that the benefit is still the same for the public when you've reduced the amount of public space for customers to come in, whether it's a restaurant or a shop or whatever. That whole block now won't be a public interfacing space, just the corner. And that's a significant change to me. I assume that this is not a hearing where we have the ability to say, hey, we want to see more commercial. This is just us approving it. Is that correct? We're having a discussion, but we can't say, we want to see this come back with retail commercial space.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wardlow, the development agreement has established the density, intensity of use and the square footage allocated to residential and commercial, so it is what it is.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for your comments and thank you for explaining.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. Commissioner Belke?
Are we ready for commentary, or are we still on questions?
We're still on questions.
Okay. I'll have a question to Jared, though. And it's this desert question that which you just you actually expressed. And would you have an objection of taking your gym and putting it on the active street side, on the Milpas side? Because that's one thing, if any fatal flaw I see here for your project, notwithstanding architectural details we can get into, is that you've killed 2/3 of the street with basically non-active space, which is sort of what she was talking about. But you could do that with it. It seems to be something you could do within the context of your project description and your development agreement. And are you willing to activate Milpas and move the residences over to the other side? Or at least take those residents on that half off, like you did on one of your prior versions of your plan. You actually had a commercial space and, for part of that, and the corridor wasn't there, and they got their access off of the courtyard and all these other things, so.
I guess, Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Balki, my short answer is no. I mean, the project is designed, we're not going to redesign the first floor of this project so that the gym wouldn't be, and it can't be open to the public. So it's no different than, I guess, other than people being able to see people working out somehow.
That's my point.
But, I mean, we would have to completely redesign this project to accomplish that, and we're not going to.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Balke. Commissioner Wiscombe, did you have any further questions? Okay. My only question is for you, Mr. Gorin. Well, actually, I might have one more after that, but you spoke about the commercial, the parking, the shared parking spaces, and how there will be time designations, and then we talked about the signage that'll be necessary. Who will enforce the time restrictions? Will it be staff that are on property? Will it be parking enforcement, since it is on private property?
Chair Escobedo, I believe parking enforcement is going to look at that. And they're going to basically be 90-minute spaces, like 90-minute spaces throughout the city, and that would be something that people will get ticketed for.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chair Escobedo, because the spaces are on private property, they would not be monitored by parking enforcement staff. So that would be up to the applicant to enforce their own, just like in any parking lot.
So.
Actually, we have a condition of approval that states that. So on page 3, or page 15 of 92, under the shared parking, where it outlines the time, it does say that the 12 spaces clearly designated and parking limits shall be enforced by the property manager on site.
Okay, that answers my question.
Sorry for being completely wrong.
No worries, we're all wrong from time to time. And then when is the 6-month deadline? This might be for staff, but you might know. But 6-month deadline for discretionary approvals? That was outlined in the development agreement, I believe.
Are you asking when the date is?
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
the specific date?
So it would be September 29th of this year.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. Unless there are any other questions, we can move on to comments. And we will start with Commissioner Wiscombe, followed by Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kennedy, could you put up the slide again that just says PC considerations, recommendation consistent with the development agreement, whatever that slide was? It was at the beginning, that the Planning Commission makes considerations and recommendations consistent with the development agreement. Do you remember that slide? Unfortunately, I didn't note the number. No, it started with Planning Commission. Yeah.
That might have been it.
You remember the slide, right?
I think she might have passed it.
This one here with your things
That's
to
it.
Consider?
Yeah,
Yes.
PC deliberations and decisions shall be consistent with the development agreement. Okay, because I think that's part of our, okay. I'm going to say that I can accept the parking modification, and I can certainly accept the front setback modification, and I can make the findings, all 4 of them, for the height exception for the project. I would like to see, since there was a lot of discussion about the, I've got to find the project description again. The project is, since we're also, we want to be consistent with the development agreement, and there was a lot of discussion about the conference room and the whole layout, which I don't really think is a big deal, but I think that any motion that we make, if my fellow commissioners agree that they can make the 2 modifications and the findings for the height exception, that we include, the development agreement has a, and I'll never find the page, it's section 12, which is actually in the agreement itself, that talks about, it says that the parties may mutually agree to minor amendments to the project which are determined by the city's community development director to be in substantial conformity with prior approvals. And since we don't know all the ins and outs of how this business center with 2 conference rooms came up, I think that it would behoove us to make a recommendation that the community development director determines that the layout of the plan is in substantial conformity with respect to the fitness area and the business center with the 2 conference rooms as outlined in the project description, which is Exhibit B of the development agreement. Mr. Gorin's nodding in agreement, or is he falling asleep? No. I'm just kidding. Okay. But other than that, I'm fine with this. I think we need to move on. This is a development agreement that was put together with our recommendations, and the term sheet was prepared, and the city council approved the development agreement. And I think we're getting 16 moderate, which is almost 20%, rental housing units here with a good chance to perhaps explore the local preference program that hopefully the owners can develop with the project. So those are my comments, and I'd be happy to make a motion when the time comes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Bauke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair Escobedo. I'll make it very clear sort of where I come from on this, because I think people may be taking my commentary as being against the project. I believe this is a sort of a keystone, sort of first of a significant change to the Milpas corridor. And because of that, it should be held at high standard, because this is going to be what everybody's going to react to. When this gets built, and trust me, the community's going to go, wow, this thing is big. And the question is it wow? Is it big? Is it massive? It's a significant change. But, oh, it's great. It's cool. It meets Santa Barbara. I think there's two fatal errors in this project, which is one, we're killing 2/3 of the street by putting residences on there unless we change their configuration and we've put dooryards or stoops on them at a minimum, or put active uses such as the gym or the conference, so people walking down the street actually see people. That's how urbanism works. This is the walk street here. It isn't around the corner. It's not a back part of the building. It is the active part of the street. That is not here. As to architecture, and I've made this comment to the applicant at the site visit, I find the architecture of this to be average at best. It's surely not at Santa Barbara standards, and it needs a lot more work. I mean, just simple things like the windows need to be recessed at a minimum of 4 inches. Those don't exist. This project is sort of Irvine-esque level of quality and not Santa Barbara quality, and you've got this project just within view shot, which is the Santa Barbara High School, or junior high school, which at least contextually, that's the neighborhood. So I can make all the findings except for 2, which are both on the height, which is about the exemplary architecture. Yes, it is a significant improvement of what there was approved, and honestly, how that got approved, I'm just flabbergasted, honestly, personally. But and also on the contextual nature. So if I was going to vote on this, I would need some direction to ABR as these issues being part of the Planning Commission's direction on this. But I can vote for 2 of the 3 finding categories, but I cannot vote for the height exception as it's currently being proposed without direction to ABR on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Higgins?
All right, so just a process question for you, Mr. Chair. Occasionally, and you've been trying to focus us, and that's not easy. But I'm wondering if there's a way to do what's on the screen and then have a separate either motion or straw poll or some elaborate minutes that where we could coalesce around some specific direction to ABR or the director, as Commissioner Wiscombe indicated about the substantial conformity part. So is there a way to break that apart? Because I feel like there's, if we don't get everybody's comments addressed, this is not going to get the forward momentum that I think it deserves to get through the process on time. So I hold this development agreement, and we're, at a higher standard, obviously, than all of our other projects. And I hate to see it fall apart. So that's just a question for you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Ms. DeBusk or Ms. Ostringer, do you have any advice on process?
Chair Escobedo, in terms of straw polls, if there are things that the commission wants to vote on that could help, I think that where it would be most helpful is if it's directed towards conditions that would be included under design review, if that's the issue that you're concerned about. That's how you would forward your comments to ABRs, through conditions under the design review section.
Chair Escobedo, just to be clear, the commission has no authority to direct ABR. This commission isn't necessarily an aesthetics board, it's not. We rely on Architectural Board of Review to get it right for us. A straw poll, I suppose, with just your comments, but there's nothing that really could direct ABR to take those into consideration.
Extra minutes? Extra comments that are written down in the minutes for ABR to review if they want? That's what we would do ordinarily, right?
Yeah, commissioner comments. We usually
Okay,
don't
so,
do
yeah, my
comments,
point is,
yes.
I'm agreeing with most of what Commissioner Bauke is saying, but I want to get to, obviously, consensus on the DA and what's on the screen. So I have to just ask a question of Mr. Gorin. Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'm going to take Mr. Gorin's rather blunt response to Commissioner Bauke's question in context of a DA here. And you're normally not that direct. So that tells me, we're operating in a different realm here. And so my question is actually, based on what the minutes from ABR state, it looks like you're going to have some trouble there when you go back to them. How do you plan on handling that? Again, should we take your response to Commissioner Bauke, sort of like the game plan going forward with ABR?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Higgins, we intend to further develop the project at ABR and look at aesthetics and things like that, but we're not, the whole purpose of a development agreement is to provide certainty to an applicant. And it's really rare, it's why you don't see them all the time. And on a project like this, we've already really stuck our neck out on providing double the amount of affordable units and completely changing the architecture from a project that we could pull building permits for and build, but that nobody likes. So we've really gone a long way here. And in exchange for that, we don't want to continue to have our project redesigned when new people come on boards, not you specifically, but boards in general. The whole purpose of a development agreement is certainty to an applicant. And what happened on this project originally before I was involved is the exact reason we need that. We don't want ABRs that oppose your entire AUD program. Sorry, I'll say it, but they haven't gotten the memo about what the city's trying to do with housing. And we don't want an ABR killing our project by over-requiring design features that now make it impossible to build. I think it's a really fine line that the city needs to tread on that. So we want the project to be the best it can. The windows are recessed, by the way. I did check that with them. They're all recessed about 4 inches. But I mean, ABR handles these kind of things. And no, our answer to ABR's comments isn't going to be a flat no. If they start saying take parts of the 4th story off and things like that, it is going to be a flat no. But if we're talking about enhancements to the design and details and the typical types of things we would expect to be addressing with the ABR after a planning commission approval, we fully expect to do that. So we do on all projects.
All right, I appreciate that. So, Mr. Chair, my comments are very simple. I think perfection is the enemy of good enough. I would go with Commissioner Bauke on his inclination to do some redesign of the street frontage, but we have a bigger problem ahead of us to solve, which is housing. That's just eclipsing everything else that I can find reason to disagree with some of this stuff. But I think the project, we're sort of hamstrung a little bit, and with the bigger picture involved, we just need to move forward. So I'm going to support the project as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, fellow commissioners, for your comments. I do really agree with the sentiment said by Commissioner Higgins. You know, to me, it's unfortunate to see this as a community benefit when the community benefit, in my mind, has been eroded in some respects. I'm happy to see that there's some inclusionary, but obviously this is not addressing any of the categories in which we are utterly failing in. But that said, this is one step in the right direction. I don't want perfection to be the enemy of the good. I do really have, obviously, issues around, you know, not having the frontal retail space. I think that's really important to building community, and I think it's a part of how you get the community behind this kind of project. But clearly, that ship has sailed. So if that is the case, you know, I am going to support this project, as I do believe this is an important step in delivering more housing to our community. So thank you for everyone's time.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the development agreement in front of me. Just what does it say about the height?
So I'm looking to the project description. So the maximum building height allowed is 45. These projects are eligible up to 60. And then it states the majority of this will be 48, and some of it...
I'm sorry, Ms. Kennedy, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you?
I'm sorry. So the majority of this structure will be 48. So it describes what they are proposing. Most will be 48, and some will be 52 feet in height.
Oh, okay, so it's already in the development agreement. what
That's
the height
correct.
will be.
Yes, the uses, density, height, number of units, they're all called out in the project description part of the DA.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I agree with the comments about that it isn't exemplary. I agree with the comments of the ABR, but we kind of have our hands tied. And it's certainly preferable, the current design is certainly preferable to the approved plan, fits more in the community. This is going to be one very large, bigger building. It's over half a block long. And even though you won't be able to see the fourth floor from Milpas Street, it still is a very impressive presence, and other big buildings in that dimension that exist in the city are set way back from the street. And this is right on the street, essentially, on the sidewalk. So I guess I don't have any choice but to go along with what, with the height exception. And I don't have a problem with the front setback modification or the parking modification. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Wardlow, your light's on still? Is that an accent? Oh. Vice Chair Bonderson, would you like to give comments?
Yes, thank you. I just want to start by saying that the word exemplary is an opinion. And from my perspective, the constraints of this site, the goals of this project, the intent to provide as much housing as possible has been met. And it may not be perfect, and certainly we all have our opinions on what we wish it would do better. I am in agreement that I personally wish it would have had a retail facing Milpas, and that aspect has been removed. But I also look at the elevations of this project simply as what it is, a design. Take it out of context for a second, look at it, and it matches a lot of different types of structures that we see in Santa Barbara. We do actually have facades similar to this on Chapala. We have facades similar to this, if I remember correctly, on Anacapa Street. We have projects that have design components that reflect in this elevation. So this is not a complete, brand-new concept that we've never seen in Santa Barbara before. I believe very strongly that the design we have today, aesthetically on the outside of the building, looking at it from the facade standpoint, is a great improvement from the project that was initially proposed and approved and could have been built. So taking that into consideration, I want to say that I'm very comfortable with what I see as far as design. I wish we had all the time in the world to make it better, but at this point, I'm comfortable with accepting it. I'm fully on board with the height exception, the front setback modification, and the parking modification. I do look forward to the improvements at the detail level that Mr. Gorin has discussed, as meeting with ABR and making those things better. But I do appreciate all of the efforts that have been made. It may not check mark all the boxes that we hope to see, but this project has been in the pipeline for a while, and it does bring housing to Santa Barbara. And even if it's not the perfect blend, it's setting a precedence for projects that could and should be coming to us in the future that will hit those check boxes of the types of moderate or more affordable units as well. So we are on the right path here, and I really want to just make that statement that it is a much better project that we've seen before, and I'm happy to support moving forward with it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. I'll keep my comments brief. I can make the findings for the parking modification, front setback modification, and height exemption. I am looking forward to when we have new height exemption findings. I think the approved project compared to this project, we clearly get a community benefit. 16 units for an income category that we have not built really any units in, the 80 to 120 AMI, missing middle. There's reasons for that. And in this project, we get it. This is also a part of the development agreement, and when we had approved the development agreement, we somewhat already made these decisions. So I'm going to support this project moving forward, and I think it's time to entertain a motion if any of my fellow commissioners would like to make one. Commissioner Wiscombe.
Chair? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. I'm going to move that the Planning Commission can make the approves the parking modification, the front setback modification, and can makes the findings for the height exception, which are 4 findings. Just as an aside from that, I have another part of the motion, but just as an aside from that, this commission has struggled with these height exception findings for quite a few projects. And I just want to point out architecture and design, that's number 2. The project will be exemplary in its design. We've been over that term before, will be exemplary. It's not our job to design the project, and in this case, it's ABR's. So I have full faith in our design review boards, no matter who they happen to be, in this case, it's ABR, that it will be exemplary in design if they make some changes. And that's true for sensitivity to context too. I think that's important. So that's part number 1 of my motion, and part number 2 is that since we have to make a decision that this is consistent with the development agreement, I recommend that we, according to Section 12 in the development agreement, mutual cooperation, that we go to the fitness area and business center with 2 conference rooms as outlined in Exhibit B of the development agreement be reviewed by the community development director to be in substantial conformity with the plans that have been submitted. And I think that's probably clear as mud. But
Second.
that's,
Beat you to it again.
I want to.
Well said, by the way.
Was your motion
That's,
done?
that's my motion. What was-
Second, well said.
We have a
and
first from Commissioner Wiscom, a second from Commissioner Higgins. Any discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing.
May I just make a comment? I wanted.
Yes.
I was hoping to second that. I was all revved up. I can never get in there fast enough, but I guess I'll third it. I want to just commend Commissioner Wiscom. That was a really well put together motion. I could not have done it better myself. No, I'm just kidding. It's really, really, you grabbed everything that we were thinking.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wonderson. Commissioner Lodge? And then Commissioner Bauke.
On the motion, I will be supporting the motion, but I want to make it clear that I believe there could have been a better project here. And the fact that this could be, the street could be activated is something that would not be a very hard thing to do by moving the gym and the conference room and stuff over to the frontage of Milpas. But I believe in getting the affordability. I believe in getting housing. For those reasons, I'm supporting the project, not because the way it is currently designed. I really, and I believe the ABR will get us to the point that it's exemplary as the findings are. But that's my basis for supporting the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Any other discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any. Ms. Fennessy, a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and start the roll call vote. Commissioner Higgins?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscom?
Yes.
Commissioner Bauke?
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson?
Yes.
And Chair Escobedo?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. And there's a 10-day appeal period for this project. Yeah. And I think we should take a 5-minute recess before the next item. 337. And we will open up item 3B, 25 Las Alturas Road. It's a proposal to convert the existing 427 square foot carport to a 2-car garage with a 457 square foot second story above. This is a discretionary application under consideration for this project. It's a maximum floor area modification of the net floor area standards prescribed by table 30.20.030A. And who do we have from staff to give today's presentation, Ms. DeBusk?
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. Robert Dostalek will be giving the staff presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Dostalek.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo, and good afternoon to the commissioners. As noted, I'm Robert Dostalek, Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. And the project before you today is 25 Las Alturas Road, and it's for a maximum floor area modification. And to get into the project description, so the project is for the following. It's to demolish an existing carport and construct a new 427 square foot garage with a 457 square foot second story addition above. And there would also be a 72 square foot addition on the lower level to accommodate a stairway up to the second level bedroom. And the project would also involve interior remodel and window replacements throughout the residence. And again, there's also the additional requirement of the maximum floor area modification, which is what you're going to be looking at today. And to get our bearings, the project site is located in the Riviera neighborhood. And can you see my, good, there's the cursor. In the Riviera, just east of the intersection of Las Alturas Road and Alameda Padre Serra. And here's APS right here. And another more prominent intersection is Coda Street and Alameda Padre Serra. So right in that neighborhood. And here's an aerial slide to get a bird's eye view of the subject parcel and some of the surrounding existing development. And you can see the street labels as well on that slide. And to get into some of the site information and the zoning, the project site is zoned RS15 under Title 30 of the Municipal Code. The general plan land use designation is low-density residential. And the properties surrounding the project site are zoned for and developed with residential improvements. The project would be consistent with applicable building height, setback, open yard, and parking requirements. And before we start digging into the meat of the FAR modification, it's worth noting that FAR modifications are unique process-wise in that they are a standalone trigger for the Single-Family Design Board. And they also require a decision by the Planning Commission. Most of the other modifications go to the staff hearing officer. And we don't process many of these. We've had a handful, maybe in the past decade or so. A couple of you on the commission may have seen one or two come across the table. And although the design review section and project findings for the FAR modification appear toward the end of the staff report, it may be a helpful exercise to touch on them briefly here before the rest of the presentation. And so here we have finding 1 for an FAR modification requires that not less than 5 members of the Single Family Design Board have voted in support of the project following a concept review. And good news on this one, this finding has already been satisfied. The project was reviewed by the SFDB on February 28th. And as noted in the staff report, the board was supportive of the project. The motion passed with 5 board members in support of the project and 1 board member in opposition. And so therefore, the Planning Commission is primarily tasked with making the remaining 2 findings. And the second finding is that the subject lot has a physical condition such as the location, surroundings, topography, or size or dimensions of the lot relative to other lots in the neighborhood that does not generally exist on the lots in the neighborhood. And finding 3, that the physical condition of the lot allows the project to be compatible with existing development within the neighborhood that comply with the floor area standard. And so it may be helpful to keep these in mind as we're moving along. And to get into the floor area modification, some background. The existing residence was originally constructed in 1964. And at 2,146 square feet, the existing residence is 79% of the maximum FAR. And you'll see the crossouts on a couple of these figures here. There's just a slight correction to the staff report based on the most recently updated plans. So I wanted to read that and present it into the record. It's relatively inconsequential and doesn't affect staff's analysis or recommendation. And there are several different triggers for FAR modifications to give some context. This project requires an FAR modification because the proposed residence following the additions would exceed 85% of the allowable maximum floor area. And it's proposed at 99% of the maximum FAR, and the average slope of the lot is 30% or greater. And in this case, the estimated slope of the subject lot is 37% per city data. And also may be helpful for the Commission's understanding that an FAR modification would not be needed for this project if the site had a slope of less than 30%, or basically on a flatter lot. For projects greater than 85% but less than 99% of the maximum FAR, a project does not require an FAR modification unless the site slope, grading, or height thresholds are exceeded. And again, in this case, it's only the slope that's triggering the FAR mod. And when proposals approach or exceed the maximum allowable FAR, applicants are required to provide additional information. And these include a 20 closest home survey, panoramic simulations, a street silhouette elevation, and story poles and other visual aids. And these supplements are primarily intended to inform the single-family design board in making a determination for neighborhood preservation, hillside design district, and slope lot findings, in addition to this floor area modification. And also, it's helpful to know that the SFDB, the Single Family Design Board, does have full discretion to waive any and all of these supplemental requirements. And we'll briefly touch on what was submitted for this project as we work through. And for the 20 closest home survey slide, to aid in evaluating compatibility, data for the 20 closest surrounding lots was provided with the project materials and the sizes of the lots, the square footage of the houses, and the FAR for comparison with the proposed project. And these are provided as an attachment to the staff report. The data show a wide range of lot and house sizes in the immediate area, and the proposed project following the additions would rank 3rd largest in FAR and 3rd largest in floor area. And this is an image of the panoramic photo simulation that was provided. And to aid in determining compatibility, the massing of the proposed 2nd level addition would appear behind the tree here, if you can see the cursor. In the foreground of the photo. Although the proposed addition is not superimposed on the photo, it still confirms that the proposed addition would not affect the existing Los Alturas Road streetscape or adversely affect public views. And I'm trying, this cursor isn't cooperating, but right in here. And we'll look at another elevation in a moment. And a street silhouette elevation was also provided with the project plans that shows the relative elevations and heights of nearby buildings on both sides of the project site. And this drawing does include the 2nd level addition that would create additional massing on the left-hand side. And you can see that right here. And this would be a south-facing perspective similar to the panoramic photo. So this would be what would be facing Los Alturas Road and also facing downtown Santa Barbara. And generally, projects over 85% of the maximum FAR must also provide additional supplemental information, such as story poles or other visual aids. However, the Single Family Design Board waived these additional requirements because they concluded that the proposed addition would be consistent with the neighborhood in size, bulk, and scale. And here we move on to the site plan that is helpful in illustrating some of the site constraints. The existing residence sits on a relatively flat building pad, approximately 25 feet above Las Alturas Road, and the site gains access from a driveway easement across 11 Las Alturas Road that you can see on the left-hand side here. So this area here, and this is the property line, roughly where the cursor is. And vehicle maneuvering areas are also shared with the neighboring property to the west. And the property boundary is approximately 11 feet to the west of the existing and proposed carport area. So this clearance here between the garage and the property line is very minimal, approximately 11 feet. And the north or the rear portion of the lot contains the required 1,250 square feet of open yard and slopes upward toward lots that gain access from Homecrest Road. In addition, portions of the existing residence are non-conforming as they encroach both into the front setback and the east and west interior setback. So you can see a little spillover here in the interior on this side, and then also the deck in the front. And these nonconformities are the result of the downzoning of the lot in 1975 from E3 to E1, which effectively created these larger setbacks. At its closest point, the existing deck that you can see on the south side of the residence is approximately 12 feet from the front lot line abutting Las Alturas Road. However, none of the proposed development would encroach into any of the required setbacks. And unlike the relatively uniform city blocks in the downtown grid area, the Riviera neighborhood exhibits sporadically spaced lots and buildings with variable lot sizes and elevation. And this is an image of the assessor's parcel map annotated with lot area figures that was provided by the applicant. And the subject lot is highlighted in yellow and hatched in red right here. And with the exception of the larger parcel that the cursor is over right now, immediately to the west, and that's the 11 Las Alturas Road site with the driveway, most of the surrounding parcels are of roughly equivalent size. However, 4 of the parcels that I'm going on the cursor here, you might be able to see a VAC. Those are accessed from Homecrest Road and are vacant. Although the total floor area of the subject residence would be greater than that of surrounding residential buildings, the design and massing of the second-story addition would be harmonious with the project setting. And here are a couple of the key elevations. The proposed second-story element would be located above the proposed garage that would be converted from a carport. This would position the second-story mass above the northernmost portion of the residence away from Las Alturas Road. And you can see on this proposed west elevation, this is the upward slope that goes up the hill behind the residence. And the image on the lower left is a view looking toward the existing carport. A couple of the folks that were on the site visit may remember this. And on the upper left image, you'll see the added mass above the proposed garage, and that's right here. And the lower right is the existing south elevation, and that faces Las Alturas Road, and the upper right illustrates how the added mass would appear. And this was similar to the street silhouette elevation and the elevation that would face Las Alturas Road and basically downtown Santa Barbara. And at approximately 18.5 feet, the height of the new second-story addition would align with the height of the existing second-story element of the residence. And the addition would not block public views and would not be visible from Las Alturas Road or other prominent nearby public vantage points. Additionally, the project site is at a lower elevation in the Riviera neighborhood, and the proposed and existing second-story addition would not silhouette above the ridge line or against the open sky as viewed from a distance. And lastly, at 457 square feet for the upper level addition, the proposed second-story element is relatively minor and would not result in disproportionate bulk or mass when compared to the surrounding buildings in the neighborhood. And to wind down, touching on environmental review, the project can be found categorically exempt from further environmental review per Section 15301 of the California Environmental Quality Act. And with the ability to make the required findings for the maximum floor area modification, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project. And that concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Thank you. And is there an applicant presentation today?
Good afternoon, Chair Escobedo and Commissioners. My name is Clay Arell, architect for AB Design Studio and the project. Would it be possible to pull up the floor plans?
Sure.
I think you have the set, right?
Yeah, for some reason.
By the way, this should be quick. There's no conference rooms, no retail.
Stop share.
Simple little addition to a house.
There we go.
There's no gym either.
Cool, thanks.
And there's no accessible parking.
And excuse me, did you say the site plan or floor plan?
I'm sorry, the floor plan, please?
Yeah. Here we go.
That's great. So the house is kind of interesting. It's a really cool mid-century modern home. This is really hard to see, I apologize, but on the right side, or on the left side, is the proposed main level floor plan. And the house has one small bedroom on this floor, which is just to the right of the stairs. You can read the plans from here. I'm trying to zoom in. So we're basically converting the existing carport into a garage because it just doesn't function well. And if you went to the site visit today, which I apologize I didn't attend because I didn't know about it, you would have seen that it's kind of challenging with the carport. There's a guest bedroom on the right-hand side, just above the kitchen, which is on the lower right side of the floor plan there. So the home has that small bedroom, and then upstairs, if you go to the next sheet, please. Upstairs, there's a small den that you can see on the left floor plan and the master bedroom next to it. So this house really doesn't function as a 3-bedroom house. So the owners, when they purchased it, they said, look, we need more space. And that's the impetus for this new bedroom that you see. And we had tried to do it initially as an ADU, but that wasn't allowed in the ordinance. And that's why we're here for the floor area mod. And even though the staff reported that the project was the 3rd largest in the neighborhood and the 3rd largest in FAR and square footage, I still think it's a very modest home, and it's more livable now with this addition for the new owners, and gives them the opportunity to actually house their 2 daughters. So I just wanted to show the floor plan to give you a perspective on the square footage, because it's not just about numbers, it's about the usability of the house, and that's why we've done the addition the way we have. And then I only wanted to address one other thing, hopefully with the commission and with staff. This project took 7 months to get through the PLN process that the city has now created for projects such as this. It took 6 months to get to ABR, or I'm sorry, SFDB. That's a really long time. We submitted this in August of 2020, what year are we in? 2021. We started the project in June, we designed it, we submitted it in August. We didn't get to SFDB until February this year for our review, and it took another 3 months to get here. So we're now into this almost a year for a very modest addition, and I really urge staff and others to look at this process, because it's not working. It's not working for the general public, it's not a very sound process yet. So that's all I have to say, thank you.
Thank you.
Available for questions.
Thank you. And we will open up public comment before we go to commissioner questions. I don't have any speaker slips, but do we have anyone that would like to give virtual public comment?
If you would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand using the raise hand icon. At this time, we do not have any hands raised, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So we'll take it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Higgins.
So to staff, you mentioned undeveloped lots up there. Is that because of slope? Or what are the constraints there?
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Higgins, we didn't look into why those were undeveloped, but slope certainly could be a factor. It is a relatively steep slope that does go up to Homecrest Drive, but that wasn't something that we looked into specifically to see why they were not developed.
And then the applicant's comment about the time it's taken, I'm aware there's some new procedures. You can't just go to the design review for some comments without some level of, I don't know, completeness review? Is that what has happened?
Commissioner Higgins, you are correct. In the past, applicants were allowed to go directly to design review where they could receive comments. But what was happening is they would then proceed to building permit, to get a building permit, and then zoning issues would come up. So the newer process is designed to do a 30-day completeness review beforehand and identify any potentially significant zoning matters that would need to be addressed prior to proceeding to design review for design comments.
So that can introduce, that maybe, I'm positive it's well-intended, but it can just kind of shift things around, right? If you go to completeness review and then you're complete with regard to any land use issues, then you go back to, or go to SFPD or design review, and they throw something at you didn't see, or you got to redesign something, then you got to go back through the process, basically. Okay. Are there kinks in your mind to be worked out with that, or is what it is?
What you're describing can happen, and sometimes it can take more than one completeness review to get a complete application or all the materials and supplemental application materials. For example, in this instance, a little bit above and beyond what's normally required for a PLN application, but it's specific to this modification type.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Arell, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that. Here's how the PLN process is going. It's exactly like the old DART process. So I submit something, they use 30 days to review it, then they give me back comments. Then I submit it again with revisions. Then they take 30 days to review it, and then they give me back comments and questions. That's 4 or 5 times on this project, and I can name 4 or 5 other projects, same thing. Now, the PLN process, item number 3 on the cover sheet of the PLN process, allows the applicant to go to a one conceptual review only for the project with the design review board of the choice, right? HLC, SFDB, ABR. We have not been allowed to do that on this project. We have not been allowed to do that on 4 or 5 other projects. That ability to do that is written in the guidelines, but we are not being allowed to go do that step, and that has an issue.
Yeah, you're gonna.
Because a lot of times we just want to go test the waters with the board while we're handling height, land use, or any other particular things that staff is concerned about with the PLN process.
Either you or I are going to engender
Yes.
the staff attorney taking a swing at us for talking about something not agendized. But appreciate that feedback.
Just trying to provide
Yeah,
clarification.
yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I watched the presentation at the Single Family Design Board, and my understanding is are the neighbors on each side of the project the ones that wrote letters in favor of the project? Is that correct? To the Single Family Design Board?
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Wiscombe, I believe the property owner to the west at 11 Los Alturas may have provided
Yeah,
a
they're the
comment.
ones with the shared driveway. They definitely submitted a
Correct.
letter. And do you know where the other one came from? It kind of was
Don't
unclear.
recollect offhand. The applicant may be aware.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, I believe it was the neighbor immediately to the east.
that's kind of what was implied at the SFBD
Yes.
meeting, yeah.
That's what I
okay.
understand. The
Thank-
owner talked to his neighbors and provided those letters.
Yeah, okay. And then just the only other thing, Mr. Orell, if you would, they did a lot of talk, a lot of review of the street silhouette. You have that here, don't you?
I can pull that up shortly.
Yeah, I think
Oh, wait.
the
excuse me,
street
it's in the
silhouette or the
plans.
panoramic photo sim, I'm not sure which one it was.
The street silhouette is in the plans here, but I can pull up the silhouette if you'd like.
Okay.
Or the,
My only question is, I think that it was pretty clear from that this really isn't a project that's visible from Los Alturas at all. Yeah. And with the neighbors on either side supporting the project, particularly the neighbor at 11 Los Alturas, I think that there was emphasis put on that at the meeting. So, okay, end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Any other commissioner questions? Not seeing any, so we can move on to commissioner comments. Commissioner Bauke.
Yeah, first off, after visiting that site, it's real clear this is a small, physical, buildable area, and they're just trying to do a very, very reasonable addition to what's there, and I definitely feel sympathy for the applicant in the process. I mean, many communities, 500 square feet is just done over the counter, and I'm surprised that we're going through months and months and months and to basically do an addition over a garage or convert a carport to a garage and build something over it, that would actually require such a lengthy process. And I'm supportive of the project as proposed and will move at the appropriate time, Chair.
If you want to make your motion now, we can continue our discussion on your motion.
Yeah, the findings are on page 30. And the findings,
This one's already been made. That one's already done. 5 members of this.
okay, so it's number 1 and 2 and 3, which is not less than 5 members of the Single Family Board or 6 members of the Historic Landmark Commission on projects referred to the commission pursuant to section 2269.030 have voted in support of the modification following a concept review of the project. Number 2, the subject lot has a physical condition such as a location surrounding topography or size or dimensions of the lot relative to other lots in the neighborhood that does not generally exist on other lots in the neighborhood. And number 3, the physical condition of the lot allows the project to be compatible with existing development within the neighborhood that complies with the floor area standard. And so I move we make those findings.
Second?
So we have a motion from Commissioner Bauke, a second from Commissioner Higgins. Further comments from the commission on the motion and this project? Commissioner Higgins?
Yep, just a good job with the staff report and the findings. It's very clear. Clear exception, so.
Other commissioner comments? Discussion? Not seeing any. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start the roll call vote. Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
Commissioner Bauke,
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And there's a 10-day appeal period for this project. And with that, we will close out item 3B, and we will move on to Item 4, which is a recommendation to City Council. It's a zoning ordinance amendment in Title 30, Emergency Service Antennas. And we'll just take a minute. You do it. And Ms. DeBus, who do we have giving the staff report today?
Thank you. We will need just a moment to pull up the staff report, but we will have Dan Henschke from the City Attorney's Office giving the presentation.
Sounds great. Commissioner Higgins?
Yep.
Before the presentation.
I don't mean any offense to Mr. Henschke, because I love to hear him talk, but is there an allowance for us to waive a staff report on something this kind of a clerical, or is that only limited to consent items? He's been sitting here so long, I kind of feel bad asking, but
It's me. Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Higgins, yes, you could vote to waive as a commission to waive the staff presentation. I assume you meant presentation as opposed.
yeah.
Yeah, and go to public comment and then to questions.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Well, so we have a first from Commissioner Higgins, a second from Commissioner Wiscombe to waive the staff presentation. Any discussion on that motion? I'm not seeing or hearing any. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll start the roll call vote. Commissioner Bauke,
Yes?
Commissioner Higgins,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you, motion passes.
So with that, we will open up public comment for this item, and we currently have no speaker slips. But Ms. Fennessy, is there anyone online that would like to give virtual public comment?
We do not have any remote public comment, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item.
Thank you. So we will close out public comment. Commissioner, we'll turn it back to the commission. Commissioner Higgins.
I just made that suggestion because I didn't see anybody in the audience. Noting it wasn't likely a controversial item, so that's not a question, that's really just a statement, so.
Commissioner Lodge.
Just to add to that, that this is a correction of an oversight when the new zoning ordinance was created. This part didn't get corrected to be with the rest, so.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. You can ask questions, Commissioner Wiscombe.
I just have one quick question. Under the definition, it's on page 12 of 18, the definition of alley, do alleys apply in the abutting definition, Mr. Henschke?
Honorable Chair, members of the commission, I'm not sure I understand the question, but we're not amending that section of the municipal code. The definition of alley that is used in that section is not changed.
Okay.
So I would defer to
That's fine.
planning of staff if they have any issues with regard to that.
No, actually, the question, it's okay.
Okay.
I think I answered my own question, my
All
own
right.
stupid question, actually. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Any other questions? Oh,
Just a
Commissioner Bauke?
Question, Mr. Chair, to the staff. I assume, after reading all this is the typical, the FCC continues to move the ball as to what's federally allowed, and you just got to keep chasing compliance. I mean, that was my experience as a community development director. I don't know how many times we amended these things when you had satellite dishes were the new thing, and it's always been this evolving, moving target, and you just have to keep up. Is that basically the bottom line of what we're doing here, is keeping up?
Honorable Chair, members of the commission, yes and no. We did make some amendments to the municipal code a while back to deal with small cell wireless, and that was to keep up with current regulations. What we've done here in this ordinance is make the zoning ordinance definitions consistent with the other definitions that we have elsewhere in the code and with FCC regulations. That was one of the technical amendments. The other issue had to do with, as Commissioner Lodge indicated, correcting a technical error in our, so we were catching up with ourselves and not the FCC in this case.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bonderson, did you have any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Mr. Chair, I would move the, recommend that we send the ordinance to City Council for approval.
Second.
We have a first from Commissioner Wiscombe, a second from Commissioner Lodge. Any discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing or hearing any. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start the roll call vote. Commissioner Higgins,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge, Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Bauke,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. And we will close out that item, and we will move on to, sorry, Mr. Henschke, for keeping you this whole time. We'll see you soon. We will close out that item. We will move on to our administrative agenda, and we will start with committee and liaison reports, starting with the staff hearing officer.
I will report next time we meet on next week's show agenda.
Sounds great. Any other committee and liaison reports? Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the April 27th meeting of the Historic Landmarks Commission, they reviewed a new 328 West Montecito Street. That's at the corner of West Montecito and Castillo, where there used to be a gas station. It's been sitting vacant for quite a while. It's a proposal for a hotel that's considered an annex to the one at 302 and 308 West Montecito Street, which was approved some time ago. It's I'm mentioning it because it's another case of hotel rooms instead of, which we don't need, instead of housing, which we do need. Other project, which I think everybody was pretty excited about, thinking maybe it would be turned into housing, is the Nordstrom building. They reviewed that on the same date, 17 West Cannon Perdido, and the applicant said they just decided housing wouldn't work, and that was all he said about it. And what they're proposing to do, they're cutting a 60 by 90 foot opening in the ceiling over the central open section, so it will be open to the sky. What they want to do is turn it into what they call a creative office space. And I'm not sure just how that differentiates from non-creative office space. And I'm proposing to bring in almost full-size olive trees and sort of change the feel of it entirely. The commissioners thought it was a great project. There won't be any retail at all. It'll be just office space. And they had some little questions about the design, but they all thought overall it was a great project. So that was what happened at the HLC on the 27th of April. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Yes, thank you. I have some news as well with regard to the State Street Advisory Committee. The chair, vice chair, and staff have recommended that the commission, or the committee, excuse me, take a short break until August so that staff, with the support of some of the SSAC members will be able to focus on the process of hiring a master planning consultant. So after the interviews are complete and the actual discussion of those recommendations will take place in early June. At least for now, it's scheduled to be in early June. It will go to council. And hopefully that will be on schedule to be approved by July. So the goal here is to cancel May, June, July meetings and reconvene in August. So if anyone is following that, please be aware that we will not have our next meeting until August. But there's a lot going on outside of the actual advisory committee. So we'll have some exciting things to share in a few months. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Other committee and liaison reports? I have one from downtown parking this morning and a few highlights. So they discussed a recommendation for the parking business improvement area, and they are going to keep the rates the same for this upcoming year. And they also gave some updates about kind of what's all the changes that have been going on State Street, and some of the highlights are they plan on increasing their pressure washing of State Street from once a month to once per week next year, and expanding janitorial services on State Street, so that'll be nice. They spoke a little bit about parklets and about compliance rates for accessibility seem somewhat low, so they're going to continue to work with business owners. And they also mentioned the new mobile parking payment platform. It's now your parking tickets have a QR code that you can pay online with Apple Pay, Google Pay, credit cards. So that's rolling out. So take a look at your parking card next time you get one. And then next week is Public Works Week. And I think there's going to be some demos and connecting with high school kids for internships, which I think is pretty neat. Yeah. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot yesterday at Historic Landmarks Commission, which would have been May 11th, before it was 222 East Canna Perdido, a project that had been before the HLC before as a condo project. And there are a lot of concerns because there's currently a big office building on that site, and then there's some space over to the west of it between Panino and that office building. Panino's is on Santa Barbara Street. And in that area is the southeast corner of the Presidio wall. It's just, there's some surface indications, but it's basically not there now. And so there's this very important historic resource there, part of which extends into the property where this project is proposed. Well, they are proposing, instead of a rather modest condo project, a project with 34 rental units and no parking. And there was a lot of concern on the HLC about the no parking, and they were proposing lifts for some of the commercial property. They still have to maintain the parking for the commercial office space, and there was concern about people, how would they use the mechanical lifts for parking, when it's not something where there's an attendant to help. So they had a lot of concerns about that project, and it needs a lot of work. And there wasn't anyone that said they could support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. All right, I don't see any other people jumping to give reports, so we will call this meeting over at 4:22. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.